Okay, good evening, colleagues. Welcome to the 41st edition of the Tourism Online Forum series in October 2024. And tonight we are delighted to have you join us again, which is hosted by the Center for Advanced Tourism Research, CATS, at Hokkaido University. Let me adjust my caption in English so you can open the caption function and follow us. And this is your host Mo. And for tonight's session, it's indeed an honor to have Dr. Simona Zollet to share her recent research about post-growth entrepreneurship for rural revitalization and sustainability transitions, connecting local food system, tourism, and community resilience. Her keywords is including rural revitalization, regenerative tourism, post-growth entrepreneurship, rural resilience, and a sustainable agri-food system. And Simona Sensei received a master's degree in environmental science and sustainable development from Ca' Foscale University of Venice, Italy, and a PhD in the international development and cooperation from Hiroshima University. And she is currently an assistant professor at Hiroshima University in the Department of Integrated Global Studies. And her interdisciplinary research background includes sustainability science, rural sociology, sociology of agriculture and food system, and rural entrepreneurship, with a geographically focus on Japan and Italy. Her overreaching research interest lies in exploring the intersection between sustainability transitions in agri-food system and rural revitalization process, informed by notions of degrowth, sufficiency, and the well-being economy. She focuses on how to create resilient rural communities and sustainable rural futures through post-growth entrepreneurship, particularly in the area of sustainable farming and food system, and in leveraging local cultures and environment in the innovative ways. And please note that this online lecture will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel of the Center for Advanced Tourism Research. So now let's invite Simona Sensei to share her lecture. And please leave your comments and questions in the Q&A box below. The floor is yours, Simona Sensei.
Thank you very much, Mo Sensei, for your introduction. So let me share my slides first. Okay, I should be sharing, hold on a second.
Right.
Okay. Can you see my slides at full screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so thank you again for the introduction. So I will go through my own self-introduction very briefly, since Mo Sensei already introduced me before. But again, my name is Simona Zollet. I'm originally from Italy, but I have been doing research in Japan for about 7 years. So again, my academic background is pretty interdisciplinary, because I did my bachelor degree and first master degree in environmental science and sustainable development. And then I move on to issues of rural development in the context of international development and cooperation, and then rural sociology, and finally rural entrepreneurship. And I was, in addition to my work as assistant professor at Hiroshima University, I've also been a rural entrepreneurship research fellow for two consecutive terms, which now are finished, but at USASB, which is the United States Association of Small Business and Entrepreneurship. So again, my research areas, sort of what I'm doing now, sort of overlap, like try to bring together two very broad themes. The first one is revitalizing rural areas, especially declining rural areas. And the other one is focusing on sustainability and sustainability transitions at the broad scale. So how we can transform our societies and economies to be more sustainable. And in particular, from the, let's say, sustainability side, I've been focusing for the most part on agri-food systems. So I've been looking in my research at how farmers, especially newcomer farmers, are adopting sustainable or agroecological practices. I've been looking into short food supply chains and multifunctional farming, or what in Japan is often called the sixth industry, so like the diversification within the farming sector. And at the more like broader territorial level, I've been looking also starting to look recently into the concept of organic farming districts and integrated territorial development from a sustainability perspective. Looking more at the rural revitalization part, most of my research has been conducted on the focus on urban to rural migration. So people moving from urban areas to rural areas. So basically the opposite of what we think about when we think about migration processes between rural and urban areas. And in connection with this topic of urban to rural migration, I've mainly been focusing on rural entrepreneurship by newcomers and also lifestyle entrepreneurship. And we will see soon how these two concepts are quite closely connected. So first of all, a lot of my research, especially nowadays, it's focusing is done in Japan, but I also do quite a significant portion of my research in Italy. So just looking, and just these are two, like very broadly, like my two research areas in the countries. And something that you can probably notice by looking at these two pictures is like one common characteristic, which is both are mountainous or hilly areas. And indeed, Italy and Japan, in many ways, have a quite similar physical geography, so prevalence of mountainous and hilly areas, which translates into a similar rural socioeconomic structure and also similar rural issues, which again are not only like limited to Italy or Japan, but are quite widespread nowadays in those so-called marginal or peripheral rural areas in most developed economies. And these issues that if you are also, if you people attending this lecture, if you're also engaged with rural related research, you might be quite familiar with these issues. So we have rural outmigration, the aging of the local population, which is leading to social and demographic decline. Local industries themselves are declining. So farming first, we have a decrease of the number of farmers, which is connected to the fact that in mountainous and rural areas, farming tends to be small scale and less productive and therefore less profitable in many cases, especially conventional farming. But also we had in the past the manufacturing industry in rural areas, which now have already shut down or are in the process of shutting down because it's not economically profitable to keep these industries in these peripheral areas. And also like processes of abandonment of the local land, like farmland abandonment especially, causes a lot of environmental degradation issues, because as we know in rural areas, like the rural landscape has been shaped by the interaction between human activities and the natural environment. So we have culturally and environmentally important rural landscapes, such as the Satoyama landscape in Japan, which are dependent on the continuation of human activities and agricultural activities in rural areas. And especially when we think about Japan, these narratives of decline are still prevalent, but especially have been very prevalent and very widespread when talking about rural areas. So the aging, the population, abandonment. And Japan, again, is one of the first countries where this situation has become so quite extreme. For example, we have this concept of Genkai Shuraku, as villages where more of 50% of the population is 65 years old, which means that these places might be disappearing in the future. There's also a relatively recent data from 2022 where which said that more than 50% of Japanese municipalities are classified now as kaso-chiki, so depopulated areas. And again, Japan as a whole is declining from a demographic perspective. So Japanese population has stopped growing around 2008, I think. So again, we are looking at rural decline within the context of a more widespread national level, somehow decline, which again has consequences on the economy, so a stagnating or even shrinking economy. But again, it's important not just to look at the negative issues or what is happening in rural areas. So there are also common strengths that we find quite that are quite the same across rural areas in developed countries. So again, I'm not talking about rural areas in general, but particularly in the context of developed economies. So in general, we see that rural residents in developed countries tend to report higher subjective well-being compared to urban residents in the same countries. And usually this subjective quality of life, this higher subjective quality of life is dependent on the higher social capital in rural areas, also higher access to nature amenities. And at the same time, looking at the income level, it was not an important or one of the most important predictors of subjective well-being. And we do indeed have, beyond just the difference between rural and urban areas, we do have a lot of research that says that beyond a certain income level that covers people like needs for their life and well-being, we don't see a strong correlation between income level and quality of life or subjective well-being. So, and again, when we look at rural Japan and what rural Japan is doing to support the revitalization of communities and attracting people, one of the common points that get advertised is, again, this concept of places where you can enjoy life, where well-being for people can be higher compared to urban areas. I just used this is the website of a village in Okayama Prefecture called Nishiawa Kuramura, which is again a relatively famous case of rural revitalization in Japan. And again, as you can see, the catchphrase of the town is to enjoy life. So please come to live here because here you can enjoy your life. And beyond, like looking beyond rural areas, we do see that the idea of how can we thrive, how can we prosper without focusing on economic growth is becoming a central question for economists and for people trying to understand how we can remain within the environmental limits of our planet, which are finite and which we are already going beyond through our economic activities, while still maintaining decent quality of life and well-being for people. And we have been seeing kind of proliferation of different or alternative economic theories that try to answer this question. So how we can thrive without growth, or particularly without economic growth. So we have concepts such as degrowth, well-being economies, steady-state economies, the diverse economies, donut economics, and I like to use the term post-growth economies to somehow as a sort of umbrella term, because often, especially when you talk about post-growth, people tend to sort of kind of reject the term because it implies, okay, I have to give up things, I have to give up modern, the things that I depend on in my modern lifestyle. But at the same time, what we are really asking is how can we still prosper and have good lives within depending on endless economic growth? And again, one of the reasons why I'm focusing on Japan is that we are already within this context of a post-growth economy, although in a negative sense. Post-growth as a country that already has reached the peak of both demographic and also probably economic growth, and is now looking at either a steady state or a progressive decline in the future. So in this and this is, of course, a trajectory that many countries are likely to be following in the near future. So it's important to try to explore economic practices, institution, types of organization that are based on principles different than economic growth and capital accumulation. And again, I'm trying to look at peripheral areas and particularly rural areas in this case as rather than as spaces of decline, as spaces of possibility. So again, and if we look again in the context of rural Japan, these ideas have already been proposed by several scholars. For example, this idea of the depopulation dividend, meaning that depopulation can bring some positive consequences, not only negative, or the idea of creative depopulation. So within this probably to some extent inarrestable trend of depopulation, trying to create spaces of well-being for the people living in rural areas. So in other words, trying to imagine how a post-growth rural economy would look like. And again, if we look overall at what has been happening in rural areas in Japan, but also, for example, in Europe, we do see that rural areas have been transforming, not just in negative ways, but also in positive ways or interesting ways that can suggest a direction for the future. So rural areas as increasingly diverse and multifunctional spaces, going from this idea of rural areas as like single economies focused based only on specific economic sector, like say like agriculture or other primary industries, to more multifunctional and diverse spaces. And rural areas as places that can indeed attract people. So not just as places where people go away from, but also places where people go to, because again, they're attracted by the quality of life that rural areas can provide. And also the migration of people into rural areas is also contributing to bring new ideas. And again, we know nowadays that knowledge is an important economic resource. We are in a knowledge economy in a way, so which implies also finding new ways of creating value from the place. So, and that's where the concept of entrepreneurship comes in. So entrepreneurship as a way of creating value, basically. And then being able to leverage the increasing connectivity that we have nowadays, especially through the internet, for example, or better forms of communication. So, which can allow us to have relatively place-based and maybe localized economies, but supported by this connection within more national or even global networks. So basically what I'm trying to do through my research is trying to look at, trying to understand how would post-growth rural entrepreneurship look like? And at the same time, looking at issues and but also new developments in rural revitalization and resilience research in the context of these new economic theories, particularly post-growth. And again, I'm going to say one thing up front again about the overall limitation of my research. I do focus a lot on newcomer to rural areas and new businesses and entrepreneurship by newcomers. So in a way, this leaves out a lot of the grassroots entrepreneurship that is connected to the people who are originally living in the community. But we will see also why having newcomers is also very relevant for the concept of entrepreneurship and post-growth entrepreneurship in rural areas. So I'm drawing upon kind of a pretty long-term series of different studies that I and colleagues have been done over the past 7 or 8 years, which again focus, it's qualitative exploratory research in different rural areas in Japan and in Italy. So, well, in Japan, we have different case study areas, but mainly in the broader Setouchi area, both like the islands and the mountainous side of the Setouchi region. While in Italy, my research is mainly focused in the Belluno province, which is a mountainous province in the northeast of the country. And also, again, within these case study areas, we have been collecting mainly interviews with rural newcomers and entrepreneurs. And we have about 80 interview sample from Italy, from Japan, because it comes from different research projects, and about 30 from Italy. And again, this is an ongoing research. So again, we are continuing to collect data. And mainly the people we are interviewing are, again, urban to rural migrants, which of different kinds. So just without going too much into details, but we have both people who are newcomer to a certain place, so they don't have any previous connection to that place. But we also have return migrants, so people who were originally from that area and then went out for education or work and then eventually came back to the community. And we focus mostly on entrepreneurship in the agriculture and food sector, but also tourism and creativity-based businesses such as craftspeople, designers, and so on and so forth. I haven't talked a lot about the sampling and the data collection, the methods, because a lot of this has been published already. So I invite, if you're interested in this topic, to check out our publications. I put here a sample of publications that are relevant to Japan, but I also have others about the Italian context more specifically. But those are more like strictly focused on sustainable agriculture and organic farming in the context of rural revitalization. So what I would like to talk today is how to start thinking about what a rural post-growth entrepreneurship for rural revitalization might look like. And I conceptualize rural post-growth entrepreneurship as somehow the connection point between different forms of entrepreneurship that happen in rural areas. So we have lifestyle entrepreneurship, which I think it's quite important because focuses on the individual and the individual entrepreneur and the motivation of entrepreneurs to start businesses in rural areas, essentially. But also the concept of rural entrepreneurship specifically as a place-based activities. So the focus on rural as a place, as a setting where entrepreneurship takes place. And then also all the kind of what is called social entrepreneurship. Others have been use the term community entrepreneurship, environmentally engaged entrepreneurship. So all those forms of entrepreneurship that have a sort of focus not only on like value creation in economic terms, but also on the local society and ecology or environment. And I will be talking here today mostly about lifestyle entrepreneurship and then rural entrepreneurship, but kind of putting the talk about the social and community entrepreneurship within these two aspects, because again, they're quite connected to each other. So it's quite difficult to talk about them like one by one or separately. Of course, these are all different strands of like scholarship around like economic practices in rural areas that has developed relatively separate from each other. So what I'm trying to do is bringing them together within the context or within the concept of post-growth entrepreneurship in rural areas. So first of all, lifestyle entrepreneurship. So who are lifestyle entrepreneurs? So one of the main, like the most important features of lifestyle entrepreneurship is designing businesses around the entrepreneur's current or desired lifestyle. So a lifestyle that the entrepreneur wants to achieve through their business. And again, there is much less focus on growth compared to more conventional entrepreneurship and business creation. Again, because lifestyle entrepreneurship tends to focus on reaching or a certain level of income that allows the entrepreneur to sustain this desired lifestyle. So there's no need to grow beyond that point. And often within lifestyle entrepreneurship, we do find, especially in rural areas, especially in the research that has been done around lifestyle entrepreneurship in rural areas, we do find a commitment to address specific local, social, or environmental issues. Often because the entrepreneurs have emotional connection to place. So, and this informs the kind of entrepreneurship or the kind of businesses they create. And lifestyle entrepreneurship, I wouldn't say maybe it's not specifically a 21st century phenomenon, but it has been strongly supported or developed because of what has been happening in the past, in this century. So especially the development of internet and the knowledge economy, which has increasingly been allowing people to basically move wherever they want while still being able to work and create business. We have the concept of digital nomads, for example, which is in a way a form of lifestyle entrepreneurship. And when we look at the context of Japan, for example, we do have a lot of research that points at an increasing level of interest of people, especially younger people, of moving to rural or at least more regional areas of Japan. In particular, this interest in rural, smaller communities because of lifestyle motivation. So better natural environment, wanting to escape the kind of the fast pace of city living, finding better community relationships, or even finding a better environment to raise your children. So all this, again, we can see them as lifestyle motivations. And often entrepreneurship is not even a specific choice. So people don't decide, okay, I want to move to rural areas because I want to be an entrepreneur. Often entrepreneurship becomes a way to create your own livelihood in rural areas where you might have less employment opportunities, for example, while at the same time maybe leaning on particular interests or skills or values. So again, this connection between lifestyle entrepreneurship and lifestyle migration when we look at rural areas is especially strong. And COVID, of course, as it might be expected, has helped to make this rural lifestyle more attractive on the one hand, but also more attainable on the other hand. We can just thinking about how teleworking, remote working is now much more accepted, even in Japan, that it was just a few years ago before COVID. So we have been working, so we have a book chapter actually that should be out relatively soon, in which we have tried to define the key elements of lifestyle entrepreneurship from a post-growth perspective, looking at newcomer entrepreneurship in rural areas of Japan. And we found 4 key points in this of rural lifestyle entrepreneurship, which aligns with post-growth principles. So I will go through them one by I will just list them now and then go through them one by one. So, and the first, and I put it in a different color because it's somehow the root and the key of everything else, which is again this redefinition of what it means to be successful as an entrepreneur, but also what it means to live well, what is necessary to live well and have a good life. And connected to this, we have the tendency of entrepreneurs to organize their enterprise and the labor within their enterprise, their own labor particularly, but also their employees, in ways that facilitates the redesign and resilience of the business. But also when it comes to the resources that are needed for starting a business and sustaining a business, and the attitude towards these resources is informed by both self-imposed limits, but also ethical commitments of different kinds. And then the focus on building reconnections and networks. And I would say more broadly, a tendency to try to focus on cooperation rather than competition. So when it comes to redefining entrepreneurial success, what it means to be successful as an entrepreneur, what is necessary to live well, we do see that in building their businesses, the people, the lifestyle entrepreneurs we were focusing on did not prioritize growth or even see as desirable. So growth beyond a certain point was not seen as something that the entrepreneurs actually wanted. So the focus is always, in most cases, on reaching this balance between personal or family well-being, economic security, so having enough to actually being able to afford a certain lifestyle, and also social connection. So the community, the relationship with the community and the people connected to the business. And we do, like in the interviews, we do see coming out again and again these values or these ideas that are quite central in all this alternative economic thinking, or that have been highlighted in this alternative economic thinking, such as post-growth. So this idea of simplicity or downsizing material consumption, more localized lifestyles, self-sufficiency or prosumption, which prosumption means consumption, production for one's own consumption. So like, for example, growing, your own vegetables for like feeding yourself and your family, it's a form of prosumption. But again, this idea of conviviality and creativity. So reusing, repairing, upcycling, making do with the resources that are at hand, that exist in the place, without seeking more or needing to bring in resources from outside. And the second point is the way that businesses, the enterprises are organized, try to focus on ways that help the resilience of the business itself. So, and one pretty common way that we see, common characteristics of rural lifestyle entrepreneurs is their diversification or their multifunctionality. So usually one business will contain different, or one entrepreneur will be engaged in different kind of economic activities or business activities. And again, this has different meanings for the entrepreneurs. So first of all, in a way, is an economic survival strategy. So rural areas have, of course, smaller markets, smaller pools of customers, also more limited resources. So somehow this diversification is necessary for the entrepreneur to survive, to make enough money to guarantee their own livelihood. But again, and this is quite central, it's a way to build resilience to both external events or external impacts, but also personal events. We saw it through COVID, during COVID, for example. So people who had tourism businesses in rural areas suddenly saw their businesses basically being forced to shut down because of COVID-related restriction. So often having a side business of a different kind was what helped them survive during these kind of sudden or unexpected disruptions. But also personal events or personal life events. So for example, having a child, so having to restructure your business around, having to manage like child rearing. So both these aspects are important, but also there is also more than that. So often diversification is a form of engaging with and leveraging multiple skills and interests, so which contribute to create this desired lifestyle that the entrepreneurs are looking for. And finally, also as a way to engage or doing work that they attribute some kind of social value that goes beyond the business creation, that goes beyond like profit generation or even satisfying one's own like desires or interests. So again, this idea of contributing to the community through a business. So third is how the attitudes towards the resources needed for creating a business is shaped by self-imposed limits and ethical commitments. So, and again, this is partly a necessity in rural areas because resources of different kinds, again, are quite limited compared, if you want, to urban areas in terms of the diversity of resources, but also in terms of the capital you need to start a business, the connection you have, the market, the potential pool of customers. So one common aspect of rural entrepreneurship is this concept that has been developed quite extensively in entrepreneurship of bricolage, or of being able to creating something new and generating value from what is at hand, or even being able of seeing new value or new possibilities in things that or resources that people don't usually give value to. So waste, for example, or even abandoned building, abandoned farmland. There is also this tendency to be engaged in different forms of economic practices that are different from what we understand as like the economy with a capital E. So, for example, bartering, gifting, sharing with people, which are practices that we don't see as part of the economy because they don't involve an exchange of money, but they are part of economy, and especially of this concept of post-growth economy. But again, this use of resources is also shaped by limits that the entrepreneur are imposing on themselves because of ethical commitments. So again, lots of people having this idea of wanting to have circular economic practices, so creating no waste, or creating something valuable from waste, or committing to sustainable forms of production, let's say organic and sustainable farming. And again, this creates this mindset of abundance within limits that is a key feature of post-growth thinking. And I just want to make an example from one of the case studies we have, which is a business in Tokushima Prefecture near Naruto City. And it's called Guru Reuse. So it's basically unmanned, so there are no people inside, shop selling good quality secondhand items. And the owner, which is a man called Kurokawa Tsuyoshi-san, which is originally from Kyoto but moved to this area. So he's a immigrant, a newcomer to this area. And his vision was to like he wanted people to use these good things for a long time. So a way to put unwanted old items, but things still in good condition, again in circulation. And it's an unmanned shop, so people can drop in, bring their items, but they can also take out items. So it's a way. Also, it's not just a second-hand shop, which Japan is full of, but it's also a way to create a community around this idea of reusing resources. And if you have something you don't need, you can bring it back to the shop. You can bring it to the shop and take something in return. And the shop is connected to a workshop on the side, which focuses more on teaching people how to repair and upcycle items. And the person, the entrepreneur who started this business also has another business, which is called Starfish, which started in 2021 and looks at, basically creates handcrafted pen from driftwood, because the person, the entrepreneur, is also involved, also committed to like improving the marine ecosystem. So the Naruto city is close to the sea. So the enterprise organizes beach cleaning activities and also uses the driftwood that is collected during these beach cleaning activities to create handcrafted items, pens, but also other things, which are sold to fund environmental education and like beach cleaning activities. So the idea of the entrepreneur that started this business was basically, how can I create value out of waste? Or what kind of story can I tell? Do I need to tell people to add value to the driftwood that is collected during these beach cleaning activities? So that's why, again, the story behind the product also becomes quite important. So the idea that these products have a social, or rather an environmental value behind them as well. And fourth, final aspect is the idea of building reconnection and networks. So again, as I mentioned before, this idea of cooperation rather than competition, but also one common aspect that we really see across rural newcomer lifestyle entrepreneurs is this tendency to be communicators. So they're quite committed through, for example, social networks to convey positive images and narratives of rural life and its possibilities. Also sharing knowledge, creating networks to support potential newcomers. So, for example, another case study I'm following is called Tobishima Life. It's a network of former immigrants who moved to a series of islands in the Seto Inland Sea, mostly part of Kure City in Hiroshima Prefecture. And again, they were some of the first people moving to these depopulating islands. And eventually they created a network to basically function as a in-migration consultation desk for people interested in living in these areas. And we now find this kind of networks in many places across rural Japan. But even 10 years ago, these kind of networks were really, didn't exist, and made it harder to find information about, moving to rural areas, living in rural areas, what kind of possibilities there are in rural areas, also from a business creation perspective, or simply for people to understand, okay, people who move back to rural areas or move into rural areas, how can they make a living? What are they doing? What kind of activities are they engaged in? So again, and also this concept of which we found, which across the interviews was quite ubiquitous, was this idea of being interested in playing an active role in the community. So this idea that in small community you can really play an important role for like contributing to the community in significant ways, in a way that you cannot do in urban areas, because in urban areas you're just one person among millions, while in rural areas you are a person in a small community that somehow can make a visible difference in the community. So we do see often this concept of a revitalization mission that is within the entrepreneurs, which again, it's not always there. We do find it's a case-by-case thing, but again, it's quite prevalent among newcomers or the entrepreneurial newcomers that we interviewed. And I would like now to move to the kind of second major component of post-growth rural entrepreneurship, which is the rural entrepreneurship itself. So the place-based component of rural entrepreneurship. So, and first of all, when we think like, we can conceptualize entrepreneurship in many different ways, and indeed many researchers have conceptualized entrepreneurship in many different ways. But one way of describing entrepreneurial thinking and acting is the capacity of imagining possible new ends using a given set of means, which is an idea that comes out of effectuation specifically. And when we think about rural areas and what the given set of means in rural areas are, so basically what the resources are in rural areas, we do have a lot of different aspects that can be leveraged from the local economy, the local industries, local culture, the characteristic of the local environment and ecology, the local society. And all of these can be opportunities, seen as opportunities for entrepreneurship. So, and in trying to connect this idea of like opportunity creation or opportunity discovery in rural areas, I draw a lot upon the concept of rural entrepreneurship as specifically defined by Korsgaard and colleagues, which did a lot of research on or in conceptualizing rural entrepreneurship as a place-based activity. And this is again their way of conceptualizing the process of rural entrepreneurship as a process of codification that implies the recombination of place-specific resources and in other ways to extract value from place, and revitalization, so intensifying the meaning and value of place. And I want to go through these points in a little bit more detail, and also connecting with the ideas behind lifestyle entrepreneurship and then post-growth entrepreneurship. So again, and they use this word extracting value from place, which I don't necessarily like, because again, it sounds like the kind of extraction that is part of like capitalist economic thinking. But again, I will try to explain why it's not necessarily so. And actually in post-growth thinking, we don't try to extract value from place, but we rather try to create value from place and then giving back to the place itself. So, so the way of, let's say, creating value from place rather than extracting value from place is by recombining and reinterpreting those local resources that exist. And again, we do find similar strategies as the one we identify for rural lifestyle entrepreneurs. So this concept of bricolage, meaning making do with whatever is available locally, although they might not be the perfect resources or might not be sufficient resources, but it's what is available locally, and that's what the entrepreneur has to work with. And then the idea of creating synergies. So as we saw before, collaborating with other local actors and entrepreneurs, but also creating connection between the place and what is outside the place. And again, using what is seen as or is undervalued or underutilized or seen as waste or without value. And again, it's important to remember that, again, this is location specific. So this specific mix of resources and opportunities is specific to each place. So no place is really made of the same mix of resources, which means that each place can have distinctive or different, unique opportunities for entrepreneurship. I just want to just briefly introduce another case study, this time from Italy. Again, one of the entrepreneur I interviewed for the Italian part of my research. So Elisa, she's a farmer. She's not a newcomer, but she's a let's say a return migrant. So she moved out for education and then for finding a job, and then eventually came back to her rural hometown. And she decided to grow hemp. Again, hemp for not hemp for drugs, but hemp for specifically for extracting, for making flour and oil for cosmetic and alimentary purposes. And the reason why she chose hemp is that this area was historically very, very famous for hemp production, but hemp production was illegal until a few years ago because of hemp production used to be legal, of course, for making, I lost the word, for making fabric especially, but then became illegal because of drug-related production issues, and now is legal again, although it's more strictly regulated. But again, this place was quite important for hemp production before, and hemp is a plant that is quite, first, it's quite environmentally sustainable, doesn't require any fertilizer or pesticides, can grow really well on poor soils, and can also improve the soil quality. So, and again, it was a common part of the rural industry in these mountainous areas. Again, she decided, and she was the first person to try to bring this economic activity, this cultivation, back to this place after it had been abandoned for over 100 years. And she decided to diversify her production. So she has been working together with several local artisans and craftsmen and bakeries to create different kinds of products. So we have a bakery, a baked product line, but we also have cosmetics, soaps, and so on. So again, this is a way to kind of find a value from the place that had been from something that was a forgotten or abandoned resource. And now actually a lot of new farmers have started to grow hemp because somehow they can see that they have become able to see the potential in this kind of crop, both from an environmental perspective, because it can be grown sustainably without pesticide and fertilizer, and also because now there is a demand from the customers for these products. And the second component in the kind of rural entrepreneurship process is that of codification. So making this new combination of resources transferable or understandable by people who don't belong to the local place and the local market, the local setting. And this is where all things like certification come in, but also branding is also part of this process as well, local branding processes. But again, also this idea of telling a story. And we saw that also when we were thinking, well, we were describing lifestyle entrepreneurship, there is this element of communication or wanting to be able to tell a story of the business, of the entrepreneur, the things they're doing, the value that they're creating for themselves and for the place. And I want to emphasize that codification does not necessarily involve like a price or creating economic value. So the ideal goal of lifestyle entrepreneurship is also to revalorize place. So this creation of value beyond the economic value creation should feed back positively into the place itself. And when we talk about more than economic or not just economic value, we can think about different forms. We can think about different ways in which this can happen. So, for example, creating an increased sense of pride and attachment to place, both among local people that see, okay, some new enterprise has been established here, and they're showing that we can make something good from this place. So this sense of pride and place attachment, and also increased belonging and place identity among newcomers as well. So newcomers becoming kind of more embedded and rooted in the place. But also value creation in the sense of enriching the local resources. So, and I would say this feeds into the concept of regenerative economy as well. So rather than extracting value from place, we are putting back more than what we are taking out, so to speak. And for example, as I mentioned before, in the case of Elisa, her starting a hemp growing business in that place inspired other people to do similar activities. So, but also she is supporting other local industries who are working with her products to make processed products, cosmetics, and so on. But also creating more attractive communities. So we see that when we have new businesses popping up in a place, the community itself can become more interesting and therefore more attractive for people who come to visit, and then might eventually even decide to move into the community because they can find a better quality of life there, or they do find that kind of resource, that combination that can support their lifestyle or their desired lifestyle. Okay, so I'm almost close to the end of my talk, and I'm sorry I have been talking for almost 1 hour, so it's almost time to end and maybe leave the floor to questions and comments. But I want to go back again to the individual component of entrepreneurship and why somehow people's flow into the countryside is quite important as well. Because again, the individual component is important when we talk about the whole process of seeing local resources, seeing opportunities. This is, of course, dependent on the person's own subjective understanding of things, their own skills, their own knowledge, their own connection, even the people they know. So again, this idea that the person itself is crucial to the rural entrepreneurship process. And especially what we see just looking at the characteristic of rural newcomers, rural entrepreneurs in rural areas, newcomer entrepreneurs in rural areas, we see that we're always looking for a balance between embeddedness in a place, but also the capacity to bridge across between the local and the non-local context. Because embeddedness, to some extent, facilitates access to local resources. So if I'm connected with local people and I know local people, it's easier to find abandoned farmland to rent or to buy. It's easier to find an abandoned house to reuse, to restore, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, the capacity of bridging between the local and the non-local context is quite crucial, because it opens up access to new resources that you might not be able to find in the place, but also connects you with people who might be doing similar things. Or again, trying to bring together people in different places doing similar things, but that are disconnected with each other. So again, this idea of kind of creating connection and so cooperating with not just local actors, but also extra local actors. And there is a pretty famous concept that has been used almost too much in Japan, talking about rural revitalization, entrepreneurship, innovation in a lot of different contexts. So this idea that innovation starts with young people, fools, and outsiders. So, and again, in a way, this is about saying something very similar to what I have been talking about. So especially the outsider perspective. So people bringing a different perspective to the local place and to the possibilities of the place. Of course, having younger people in the community means people that might have like more willingness or interest in trying out new things or trying out new businesses. And again, this idea of the fools as people who kind of try to ignore common sense and maybe ideas that, okay, this place has nothing of value, there is nothing here, which are words that we hear quite often when we go to rural areas, and trying to create something new despite what the common sense would be. So again, this idea of newcomers as people or newcomers within this context of post-growth economies, of people who are embedded in a place, so they're trying to create value for the place, but also able to connect between the place and outside. And in a way, people able to see a place as it could be. So it's not just about using local resources, but also creating new resources from a place, or going again a little bit against what the common sense would suggest. So just the last case study I want to introduce about this topic, and to try to wrap up this, and by giving an example of what I see as a maybe post-growth enterprise, a small scale one, but that again connects all these different elements that we have been talking about until now. So the business is called Ohezo Cafe. It's a bakery and a restaurant in Sera town, which is a mountainous town in Hiroshima Prefecture. And again, it's a business started by a couple. He is originally from Spain. She is from Japan. She's actually a native of this area. So she moved out. She went to work in Tokyo for several years. Then she went traveling in Europe. She was actually woofing, so going around organic farms. And they met and eventually got married and decided to move back to Japan, to her hometown. And they were just interested, both of them were interested in organic farming, sustainability, healthy eating, but they didn't really have a clear idea of what they wanted to do in a rural area. So both of them had no background as entrepreneurs. So they were both like office worker previously to move into this rural town. But again, they decided to somehow use their interest and passion to start a business, because again, they had no other choice. There was nothing they could do there. They just wanted to, have a rural lifestyle, grow their own food, but at the same time, they had to support their livelihood in some way. So again, they decided to turn passion so turn their passion or their interest into a business. So in particular, Frank, the Spanish man, was interested in making bread because he could not find authentic European bread or sourdough bread in Japan, especially in rural Japan. So decided to make his own bread. And they started with a small cafe and just enough to, survive economically while they were trying to learn how to make bread, to source local ingredients as much as possible. But eventually this place became popular enough that they added a bakery business to the side where people could actually buy the bread. It was not just being used in the restaurant. And the business has somehow grown organically to the point that they have expanded to they basically reuse an abandoned convenience store to create a new bakery, which is closer to the main road, so they can attract more customers and people passing by. And at which point they decided to somehow that was the ideal size for their business, whatever they could sustain by themselves with their employees, and that could provide them a good enough lifestyle for what they desired. They're also starting now to grow their own wheat to make flour rather than having to buy all the flour from outside. They also cooperate with other local farmers and producers for the ingredients of their bread and the restaurant ingredients. And again, their value driving the business is this idea. So ohezo means belly button. So they want to be somehow a central hub that can nourish the community with healthy food, but also can bring back some value or improve the community, for example, by reusing abandoned buildings or providing opportunities to learn and connect. So they have workshop for people who want to learn how to make bread and start their own bakery business. They do community events, and now they provide some employment opportunities for local people and newcomers as well. But again, within a set of values that we can see as post-growth values. So, for example, not growing bigger than they can handle, or not sacrificing their sustainability values, or trying to contribute to the place. And I will just stop here. So just for a final slide that somehow summarize my thinking around how to change the narrative in rural areas to bring about more post-growth thinking and post-growth economies, and somehow turning rural areas from spaces of decline to spaces of possibility. And again, it's a sort of self-sustaining circle. And again, we have changes in lifestyle that enable people to live their desired lifestyle, for example, through entrepreneurship or different alternatives form of working, and which brings about new enterprises or innovative enterprises in rural areas, which in turn can attract more people who are interested in the place. They want to see what this business is about, and might eventually decide to move to that area themselves, therefore creating some kind of clusters of new businesses and newcomer immigrants. So, but again, there are a lot of open questions, and I just put two very big questions that connect to this idea of creating post-growth economies. And one is this uncertainty, overall uncertainty of rural future in the advancing of depopulation and aging and so on, despite, you know, this trend of newcomers to rural areas. So, and often some of these post-growth ideas are actually conflated with neoliberal thinking around decentralization and self-determination of communities, and like, communities having to do everything by themselves to sustain their own future. But again, post-growth entrepreneurship or post-growth economies imply to create a condition for this kind of enterprises to grow. So, for example, providing the basic services, the kind of post-growth entrepreneurial ecosystem that is needed. Again, maintaining basic services, maintaining healthcare, maintaining education services, and so on and so forth. And another question is how a lot of what's in the end, what sustain a lot of newly emerging rural entrepreneurs is the support in a way of urban consumers and the connection of rural entrepreneurs with urban areas. So to what extent can we create more localized and circular economies? What is the ideal dimension of local community economies? And how should the connection between different community economies be created and sustained? So I will stop here, and thank you very much for your attention for what ended up being quite a long talk. So, and there are a lot of things that I was not able to cover. And so if you have any question or comment, please feel free to
Okay.
ask.
Thank you very much, Simona Sensei. I think we already have one question from Etu. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
Okay, so Etu's question is, thank you very much for the illuminating lecture. I was interested if in your research you have noticed any particular tensions emerging with the urban immigrants settle and establish entrepreneurship in rural communities? That's the first question.
Okay, so thank you. That's a very good question. And I think we could talk a lot about the relationship and also sometimes the tension between newcomers and local people. But so we see different kind of tensions, and it's something that you can see probably most commonly in the farming sector, because we always, both in Japan and in Italy, it was quite similar how we tend to have this kind of tensions between the local farmers who do mostly conventional farming and the newcomers who tend to be doing sustainable forms of farming, whether it's organic farming or natural farming in Japan. So different forms of sustainable farming. And so we do see often this tension between the two. But one, let's say, positive aspect of more like operating in more marginal rural areas, both in Japan and in Italy, it was again quite similar, is that this relatively advanced situation of kind of decline of farming and farmland abandonment means that there is space for newcomers to develop their activities in a way that they might not be able to do in other areas where, you know, we have large-scale conventional farming, there's no space for newcomers, and so on and so forth. So let's say that marginal areas, in a way, have more potential for creating new forms of entrepreneurship, because there's this situation of decline means that there is an empty space that newcomer can often occupy. And it's maybe similar with other forms of entrepreneurship. So maybe often newcomers create businesses that don't really exist in the place. So something new that sometimes local don't really understand. So they don't understand why is there Spanish and Italian bakery in the middle of the Japanese countryside. But often then people, even local people, come to appreciate these new businesses for the value they bring to the place. So again, we do see different situations, but we also see these spaces of possibility for newcomers in many marginal rural places. I hope
Okay,
that
and
answers
the one
question.
follow after is, as this process involve an inevitable exchange or even possibly a clash of values and different in thinking regarding lifestyles, I would expect it to also cause some difficulties and perhaps uneven relationships along the way. So for example, if the urban immigrants becoming the primary beneficiaries of economic and other benefits due to a success business, I think this is a comment, right?
Well, and that's definitely a very good point and very good comment. And we do, yes, of course, we do see these dynamics as well. And I think the Japanese case in particular is quite interesting in how there is a very strong focus among newcomers about, and it does come to the maybe Japanese culture and how the rural culture is as well, this idea that you have to somehow contribute to the community in some way. So that's why we do see a lot of newcomers, especially in Japan, who are trying to contribute to the community through their businesses or even their being there. But and again, but we also see again these clashes in lifestyle, in values. But in my opinion, what we are seeing in many places where we do have a successful establishment of newcomers who then attract other newcomers who also go to in the same area to live or start their own businesses. It's this gradual change of the culture. So lifestyle promoted by newcomers or lived by newcomers become more and more accepted and understood. And what, maybe 10 or 20 years ago were like weirdos, people moving to the countryside doing strange things, now are people who are doing something valuable for the community. Their contribution is much more understood and accepted. So we do see changes in kind of attitudes towards newcomers as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Etu, for your question and comments. And next is Ishii-san. Ishii-san's question is, thank you very much for your presentation. I have two simple questions in the following. I think it's really great questions. Rural entrepreneurship is important to revitalize the rural areas, but I don't think there is many of them in Japan, right? What can we do to foster and expand this entrepreneurial activity in rural areas? That's the first one.
Okay, that's a good question. It's a good point. And first of all, one thing, and that would be again a whole lecture in itself, is first of all, how do we understand entrepreneurship? Because there is this maybe very common understanding of entrepreneurship as startups, especially in the tech industries. So we have this idea that an enterprise, a venture, has to be something promoting high technological innovations, or something that, a business that has to a startup, meaning a business that grows very quickly. And although this is part of entrepreneurship, of course, the question is, to what extent is this kind of entrepreneurship, for example, suitable to rural areas? And why we don't give the same importance to other forms of entrepreneurship that are more suitable to rural areas. So again, agri-food businesses, tourism, but also providing services for local people. So again, one thing is, how do we understand entrepreneurship? But then I do agree that, and when we look at the data, Japan kind of ranks quite low when it comes to entrepreneurial attitudes and thinking and so on. But one aspect that I find quite interesting in Japan, that is also quite unique in Japan, is our initiative like the Chiki Okoshikiru Kutai program. So, which again is designed to bring local outsiders, especially young people, into the community to engage in some kind of activity that can support the community, with this assumption that maybe this person, after these 3 years where they get a salary and housing, in order to be able to create these activities, we have this expectation that the person might stay in the local place. So one main goal of this Chikyoko Shikirikutai initiative is to attract people to the place. But another goal that is also quite important to the initiative is to foster entrepreneurship. So get these people to use these 3 years to start thinking or starting to develop an entrepreneurial idea that they can start after the 3 years of their term is finished. So again, and this is a way that is quite interesting to somehow try to foster entrepreneurship, because basically you're being paid to, go to a place, provide services to the community, but also think about what kind of enterprise or your own business you might start there. And this is a model that I find quite interesting and we actually wrote a paper about that, but it's definitely an interesting case. Of course, I'm not saying that it works perfectly or that it works, but it's an interesting way of thinking how to foster entrepreneurship in ways that might not be conventional or what we conventionally think as fostering entrepreneurship.
Okay, there is one more question is, what is the relationship between post-growth and rural revitalization? Does this mean that is okay if the individuals living in the rural area are spiritually fulfilled, even if they are not economically prosperous? Thank you again.
So again, a very kind of a philosophical question, but the point is, how both individuals and society define prosperity. And for example, what we have now in our society. So is that so we still have a lot of economic inequality. We have people who have a lot and people who don't have enough. But also at the same time, we have a planet that has finite resources. So we need to somehow slow down the growth of the economy or come to a steady state economy. So again, the point is, what do we really need to have fulfilling and happy lives? So do we really need what nowadays the society and the economies tells us that we need? And a lot of people who move back to rural areas they have this idea that we actually don't need all of that stuff. We need some more basic things, that is, fulfilling lifestyle, human connection, and doing a work that brings you some kind of satisfaction. And if that means, lowering my income to a level that still allows me to live and, send my children to school and pay for my pension, I don't really need more than that. So that is what I'm trying to get at. And that is what post-growth really means. Trying to understand what we really need or how much we really need to live, and create and building the economy around that rather than around the assumption that we need to keep growing from an economic perspective to keep being prosperous. And again, I know this is there's a lot to discuss here, but I hope this somehow answered the question.
Okay, thank you, Ishii-san. So I have a final question to ask if nobody giving you questions. So Simona, since you has several backgrounds, for example, your first master is from bioscience part of rural agriculture. So what's your feelings between the social science part of agriculture research and bioscience part of agriculture research? So since you had both experiences, could you share a little bit more about that?
Again, a very broad question. So, what we see, between more socially oriented research and more maybe what you mean as, I don't know if the bioscience, do you mean environmental?
Yeah.
Well, again, very broad field with a lot of different lines of thinking within them. But one thing we can see quite often is how on one hand, we see a focus on technological solutions of different kinds. Like, just me make the example of agriculture and sustainable agriculture. So this idea, on one side, we see a lot of focus on sustainable agriculture as something that can be achieved through technological advancement. So improving how we, how we do precision agriculture, so we can, know exactly how much pesticide to grow, to give to that plant so it can grow. Or, using drones or using big data for predicting agricultural patterns. And on the other hand, we see a more holistic thinking about, okay, this very pointed technological solution are not really solving the big issue, or looking at the big issue and the big perspective. So how can we look at what is happening from a systemic perspective, and try to focus not just on technological improvement, but also on the social and cultural aspects, for example.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are right on time. Okay, if there is no more question, I will close tonight's session, and thank you, everybody. And
thank you very much for the people who attended, and thank you for inviting me.
Yes, so everybody have a great evening, and see you next month. Okay. Okay, thank you. See you.
Thank you.